criticism I have to start with for some of your concern about duality, Greg, is that what is this and what is that? To be concerned with it is carrying something. If you're carrying anything, you can't get to the other side, to borrow from another discussion. And that's to say that even trying not to be caught up in dualism is being caught up in dualism. Finding yourself, noticing yourself in dualism, but not begrudging the fact that you're in dualism is non-dualism. This is a conundrum of Zen. This is the conundrum of Zen, which is different than much of the other. Well, I can't say that I know very well a lot of the other traditions and how they think on the inside, but my supposition is that that the other branches of the great tree of Buddha Dharma uh, might not make such space for everything to exist, even in contradiction, as Zen tends to. Well, and certainly not just embracing the contradictions as much as Zen does. That said, what are your updates?
So your criticism is valid. I think the difficult part at my stage is that I feel like I have so much like karma that's like coming out as like I've been sitting more,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to still get confused and swept up in it. And so I know that like the idea of like resisting dualism is creating dualism,
Mm-mm.
but I just find myself not being able, like, that's just naturally what's happening with me. So I'm kind of just trying to accept that it's happening and I can't
Mm-hmm.
really do anything about it. But yeah, I just end up like getting confused because my mind is just like thinking so much, and I get swept into it sometimes naturally. Um, I think that's kind of, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. But as far as like uh, update from like the last time we were talking about um, discomfort and the role of like intentional discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think when we were last talking, I was like in a place where I was a little frustrated, trying to like just figure out what's going on. And so now, as I've thought about it or like sat with it more, rather than looking at things in terms of discomfort, uh, I think I would reframe it as like avoidance. So in like those situations, or like think about like in monastic life, or if someone goes to do like a retreat, you cannot avoid your mind, and so
Mm.
that's where the discomfort largely comes from, is the fact that you cannot avoid. So in lay life, we do have a lot of freedom to avoid things that we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to deal with, and so rather than the question being should I intentionally create discomfort or make myself uncomfortable, I think a way to frame it is when you find yourself trying to avoid something, it's probably because it's uncomfortable or it creates discomfort. And so that is what you should not like avoid. Don't avoid situations where you're going to be uncomfortable or in discomfort.
Mm. Uh, Exactly. That is very much the challenge in our lay life. I mean, I would like to I would like to posit that the Buddha did just live a regular life as a prince or whatever circumstances he had. I mean, he wasn't a monk in the beginning, right? And at some point, he became aware of his suffering, or became aware that it was happening, started to notice it. And I think that, I mean, most people who start to ask a certain set of questions that lead them into, oh, Buddhism might have answers like this, even my own self, and I think you too, at some point when we were young, we were starting to ask questions. Of course, you've got uh, heritage in a Buddhist country, so that's sort of a closer opportunity than, for me, being from the American Midwest, and Texas, born in Texas and raised in the Midwest. That um, uh, it's God's country. There ain't nothing there. Even the religion of the land has been swept away by my ancestors. So that, but asking the questions in our modern time can lead people to the Buddhism as kind of having some kind of a medicine for the issue of suffering. Like, well, what do I do with this life right now? And if one wants to go nuts, so to speak, to quote Michael Keaton as Batman, you want to get nuts. Um, then you go and you do a bunch of retreats. You find a teacher in some Buddhist tradition, and you just get close and you just dig in and dig in and dig in. And maybe you end up becoming a monk, and then you get drilled in training in whatever that tradition is, and you get to study it. But for most people who give themselves to the life at hand, like I'll throw in this quote from Master Dogen saying, "Why wander around in the dusty lands of some faraway place when right where you are is the perfect place to practice?" One could think that do zazen, sit on your own cushion in your own house. You don't need to go to some other place. Well, hey, I came to Japan, and well, I came to a faraway place, but now I'm here. But actually, what that means is you don't need to become a monk. Your regular life is exactly what it needs to be, exactly what you need it to be. And what a teacher who has gone through some regimen, some programmatic, pedagogically applied study in a monastery uh, ought to be able to recognize, and I do pray that I'm capable or grow capable of doing, is listening to your suffering and pointing you at your own life as being practice. Like, oh, look, you don't need to make more suffering. Of course, your desire to deal with the suffering puts you on a cushion. It puts you sitting. And when you sit, you run into your own mind. It's uncomfortable. You start to realize things that you don't want to realize, that are uncomfortable to realize at the beginning. It's getting through those that leads to living authentically. You have to deal with the suffering that's already there. And then to speak about what the Buddha practiced in the forest, in all the different traditions that he encountered, or that a Zen monk might encounter in our training, or any other monk in any other Buddhist tradition, or even non-Buddhist tradition, perhaps yogis and Jains and all those folks do something similar. Each of those practices are mirrors of an everyday, mundane, regular person life. Nothing different than waking up, washing your face, brushing your teeth, using the bathroom, making some coffee. It's not different. It's just concentrated. And even though it looks different, and maybe listening to it sounds like, oh, wow, it sounds, arduous and rigorous. But actually, your life is arduous and rigorous. Even if you think you live in a world of comfort, actually, that world of comfort is full of discomfort, full of dissatisfaction. And being willing to get into an uncomfortable conversation with a teacher, well, me, thank you for being here. My practice is incomplete without you. So thank you for being here, is showing up upright to your own life. It's your life that is your training that points you at an opportunity to be free, and also points you at an opportunity to free all living beings. A terrible, heinous conundrum that.
Yeah, that's something that stresses me out. So I think like thank you for everything you said. Uh I think like as I've been practicing and becoming more familiar with the practice and with myself, I just like I experience the discomfort of not liking what I'm seeing
Mm,
on a regular basis. It's becoming more apparent basically that beliefs and views and maybe actions aren't in line with the values that I would like to have. And so I think that then kind of when you try to untangle that, it's like, well, so what do I actually do? I think that's kind of where like a lot of my questions are stemming from. And it's like there's this emphasis in Zen and Mahayana Buddhism of like, bodhisattva vows and actions. And to me, it's like, man, I already have enough going on just in my own situation. I'm trying to save myself, let alone everyone else. So I think I don't know. It just kind of feels a little overwhelming at times, and I find myself feeling guilty about like maybe not acting compassionately when I feel like I should. And then I think that then kind of puts me back in the thought of like, well, if I'm not being compassionate now, it probably just means I need more practice. And it's like, well, how can I make my practice better? It's like, oh, well, maybe I need to be uncomfortable like all those monks. And I think that's how I ended up in like that line of thought. Um,
mm,
you
mm.
know, and that's kind of like when, like my thoughts are spinning. I feel like I'm in like a thought whirlwind. And after a while that passes, you kind of you're like, okay, I have better visibility now of all of that. I'm not in the middle of that storm anymore. And it starts to make more sense. And I think that's kind of where we started. Like I'm so worried about the dualism, but I'm like caught up in it
Mhm.
when I'm in those storms. But yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on like the emphasis of like compassion, bodhisattva vows, but like someone who is just starting, that can seem like really overwhelming.
Indeed. It was overwhelming for me when I first heard the idea. When the first time well, actually chanted it in English, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Ha, ha. How in the, what in the, okay, I can conceptually get, okay, a bodhisattva vows to forego their own nirvana for the sake of all beings entering the same, getting there together. Like we work for the benefit of all beings to get there together. But we also have a fundamental and contradictory understanding that we can't change anything outside ourselves. We can only change ourselves and our regard for the world of all phenomena, the Dharma. I am recently really loving to say that the Dharma is not the Buddha's teachings because the Buddha found the Dharma. What is Dharma? Dharma is seeing deeply into nature and understanding existence. That's something beyond Buddha. Buddha's dead. We don't need him anymore. Just the Dharma's enough. But also, okay, there's the three treasures. This is the teacher, teachings, and community. Okay, yeah, that's but um compassion in this case is at the outset, there are too many subtle factors. There's lots that we can study, but there's so much that we don't need even in the short term. That always reminds me of that story of the Buddha in the forest when one of the arhats around him, in Japanese we call those Nakan-san, when they are around the Buddha and they ask, so Bhagavan, that's another epithet of the Buddha, Bhagavan, what is it that you have come to understood? And what is it that you are teaching us? How much do you know? And he picks up a handful of leaves on the floor from the floor of the forest and he says, which is greater, the leaves in my hand or the leaves on the floor of this forest? And the Arhat says, well, duh, the leaves on the floor of the forest. And he goes, and thus, what I have come to understand is the whole floor of this forest. But what you need for a happy life is just the leaves in my hand. So this is what I teach you. It's just a little bit. You don't need all this. Yeah, people in later generations will come to understand various aspects of all of these things. But generally, people right now don't need all this. They need this. Probably at a given time, it's, no, maybe we don't need this leaf. We need this other leaf. The handful changes depending on the circumstances that a given group of people, a culture, a category of people need based on their circumstances, their cultural background, the conditions in which they have grown up, the things that they have endured, and also the time. What is that modern understanding? How do they need to regard their lives? And so it changes. And I think the Buddha knew that. And I think it's easy for us to forget. It's even easy to forget if you become attached to the Buddha, if you become attached to the Buddha Dharma as teachings of the Buddha. No, it's beyond the Buddha. And the teachings are verifiable at every step. What is unverifiable is probably what you don't need. If you can verify it, use it. If you can't use it, you don't need it. And in that way, compassion is not just what we direct out. How does this connect? This is a little wild. Hang with me. It's not just what we do in that direction, but it's also what we do in this direction. It's not babying ourselves. It's certainly not babying ourselves. Even just asking the question, well, what is the Dharma? What is true? How do I deal with the suffering in my life? Is a gritty undertaking. It's full of its own discomforts. So it's not babying yourself. However, making space for yourself to say, whoops, that interaction wasn't very compassionate of me. Oh, what a turd I am. That's compassionate. And saying, that's okay. Say sorry if it's the right thing to say. Sometimes people don't want to hear you say, I'm sorry. And so you just say, I acknowledge that wasn't very good. And inside oh, this person doesn't really like it when I say sorry because I mess up a lot. So I say sorry too much and they think that. So I'm just going to say, wow, I messed that up and just leave it at that. And that's also being compassionate to them and to you. If you're not compassionate this way, what can you give others? If you don't eat, what energy do you have to help others? It all has to start here. If you don't take up the study of the self in Zazen, then how can you encounter anyone else honestly, wholly, compassionately?
What do you do? I guess what I'm kind of tangled up in right now related to this is it's like a very fine line between excusing inaction as a form of like self-compassion, when really it's probably like attachment to something else, versus maybe pushing ourselves a little bit more than we normally would to try to do something compassionate. So like right now I feel like my awareness of not taking action on compassion has gone up a lot. So I'm starting to see a lot of these things, and it's like, well, now I kind of have like this sense of dread almost of like, I have to do so many uncomfortable things that I don't want to do. And if I don't do them, then I'm going to feel guilty. because of like I feel like I should be more compassionate.
Mm,
Um, and in reality, I feel like I should just sit more, and it kind of will solve itself. But I think that's kind of what I'm dealing with, or I'm getting caught up in, is like, does zazen naturally lead to more compassion, and it will kind of resolve itself, or do I actually need to be, in a sense, exerting myself to do something that I wouldn't traditionally do to be compassionate, and then that is like the discomfort that I've been avoiding in a sense. And I'm kind of still caught up in all of it.
mm, mm. So when we do zazen, we don't do other things. When we don't do other things, that means we put down all the matters, all the things. We let it all rest. That means the judging. That means the measuring and comparing. That means the like and dislike. All of that, well, cognitively is still at play. We don't turn that off. The thought secreting organ continues to secrete thoughts. However, with the body, we stop acting on those secreted thoughts, those secretions. We stop acting for a moment until we practice just enough. It doesn't take much, but just enough not doing, putting down, then we can't let go. If we hold on to a thought such as, I feel guilty because I didn't do blah, 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 whatever, whatever that is, whatever guilty leftover there is from a past interaction, until we practice enough, it's easy to carry that crap around. But actually, one of the gifts of being human is that we forget. And that means to a great extent, you're not a bad person, so you're not perpetrating horrible things on people. Uh, so you can forgive yourself for that. But whatever small infractions that you've committed will be forgotten largely. And you can trust that. It takes time sometimes. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes someone will bring them back up and use them as a weapon, and they'll poke you with them, and you'll feel your own guilt because you'll go, oh, yeah, I did that. Well, you know what? It's fine to feel that guilt. But when that moment passes, you can put that down too. And that's okay. That's a self compassionate action. Just, you're free to not have to carry it all. You're free to not even have to feel like I've not done enough. I've not accomplished anything here. Actually, it's okay. I haven't accomplished anything, is getting the body out. That's dropping away body and mind. I have done nothing. I am incapable. Okay. Well, if you can sit, you can sit. That's all that's all it takes. It's a metaphor. It's a practical use. It plays itself out. Giving giving everything an opportunity to rest is compassion in both inward and outward directions. It all happens simultaneously. That's also the Bodhisattva vow of freeing all living beings. May we together with all living beings deeply enter the Buddha way. That is compassion happening inward and outward at the same time. Not a little bit and not a lot, completely, in all 10 directions throughout space and time. And though I have freed all living beings, not a single one is freed. Who? What? Well, just put it down. It's okay. That's a conundrum. What are we going to do with that? How do we comport ourselves? How do we How do we regard what's playing out in that? Everything is as it is. Everything is just fine as it is. We don't need to change anything. Change happens on its own. You don't need to apply any more intention than the ground that you walk upon, which is, I vow to free all living beings. I take up this bodhisattva idea, or I consider this bodhisattva idea as a thing that people could do. And for now, I'm just going to do some zazen because I'm incapable of doing that thing. Actually, you've completely done the thing. It has completely played itself out. It has completely become compassion in every direction. It has become Kannon Sama, Avalokiteshvara, manifesting at the tips of every cell in your body, not just your fingertips. And every molecule of oxygen and carbon, nitrogen, bouncing around in the air. Every beam of light.
So that makes a lot of sense when I'm sitting, but then once I'm not sitting anymore, it's like that kind of all goes out the window a little bit. Because life is messier. It's like you always have to make these decisions, or it's like, oh, the spider is in my shower, and if I turn the water on, it's going to kill the spider, but also I have somewhere to be in 10 minutes, so it's like
yeah.
So like life has a way of making these things tricky. Yeah, I think part of my question the last time we spoke is kind of like, is it correct view to trust that if we continue to sit, changes will naturally happen and we'll find ourselves making changes to our life that we might think we need to do right now, but like it'll kind of take care of itself if you just trust in the practice?
Yes.
Or is it necessary? Okay. So, because I think I still have this idea in my head that you can't just sit and wait. Like you still have to like take action even when you don't want to. Because if you don't ever start doing that, like you're never going to break out of that cycle of inactivity. So I think that's kind of like where I was talking about the discomfort. And I was like, well, truly, you can't just sit your entire life and then things just work out, but maybe that's the truth that is there, and I just can't. I'm not at the stage of accepting.
Yes, you're right. A child once asked me about my favorite Zen master, Bodhidharma, another time, a few years ago. And I told the story of him sitting in a cave facing the wall for 9 long years. And the kid really beautifully, he was, what was he? 9? 9 or 10 years old? And he goes, well, how did he go poo? Like he had to eat something, right? I'm like, you're right. Did Bodhidharma just sit in a cave and face a wall for 9 years? Well, duh. No, of course. He had to poo. He had to clean. He had to wash his clothes. He had to wash his body from time to time. If he's a Buddhist monk and he's following the teachings of his master, who followed his master, who's followed his master, who 28 generations before followed the teachings of the Buddha, then you go to the river and you wash your body and you take care of your poo in a certain way. Like they're all prescribed methods for doing all those things. None of that is separate from sitting in a cave facing the wall. And yet, he surely did not just sit facing a cave or facing the wall in the cave for 9 years straight, like no eating. That, of course, that doesn't make sense. The Bodhidharma doesn't make sense. So maybe he did. I don't know. But that's another metaphor for what does it mean to sit facing the wall for 9 long years, even at the point that you've become a master. You're still doing the stuff that you have to do to live your life. That's Zen. That's the difference between Zen and something that's not Zen. Yeah, you're sitting, but you're also just doing. But then when you're done doing, When the doing is exhausted, you're just sitting. And so, yeah, if you're taking up the practice, adjusting the body, adjusting the breath, putting everything down, letting the myriad things rest, then an important part is taking care of the three treasures: the teacher, the teachings, and the community. That's taking care of your relationship with someone who sees you from the outside. I think we can all agree that it's really easy to get inside our own thing and think that we're doing the right thing. If we're not seen by another, by a third party, then it becomes really easy to miss stuff. So it's really important to consult with another person who sees you. And that's not just like, the monk who sits in the teacher seat in your life. It also means like checking in with your friends. It's like, hey, Greg, man, it's kind of getting a little fat, like maybe lay off the candy. Your friend is being your teacher. Listening to that is a good thing to do. It's part of the practice. But then also showing up to your friend's house and being like, hey guys, the game's on. I heard the what was it recently? Like the Bears beat the Packers. That was pretty interesting. That never happens. You want a beer? And like being together, taking care of community, taking care of Sangha in that way is also really intimately inextricable from the practice. That's also sitting facing the wall for 9 long years. And being willing to see everything as pointing you in the direction of Buddha. Even your own folly, your own anguish, pointing you in that direction and regarding it that way. It's all playing out. Change doesn't happen overnight, but over time, you become a completely different person. Every 3 months, your cells are completely different. That's one. But also, just by doing the practice over time, it all settles down. Other new things come up, but then those also settle down.